Hello, this is Domenico with Easynomics, and we're going to continue going over a Paper 2 type of exam. In the links below the video notes, there'll be links to two other videos that were breaking down this Paper 2 question. Here you can see them here. We went over the PED value for petroleum in the context of a global market for crude oil. Within that context of the Russian-Ukrainian war, we looked at a real-world example and articles of that. And then we also did a question on the elasticity of the supply curve for crude oil being very inelastic. So in the video notes, there's links to these explanations. They're also tied into different playlists for microeconomics. And for this video, again, we're going to be utilizing this particular article, looking at the collusive oligopoly of OPEC plus and their inability to ramp up the quantity of supply of gasoline due to spare capacity constraints that was discussed in the previous video. So in this video, we're going to look at supply and demand put together. In the previous two videos, we were breaking down this question here, applying an appropriate model and analyzing it. And then we also had another video looking at applying an appropriate model for this question regarding to supply. So for this video, we're going to focus on this question here, number 3. Question C, actually. So let's read through it and then highlight a few key points, and then we'll be good to go. So this question is asking us, using a demand supply diagram, so we're going to have to have demand supply put together, illustrate the global market for crude oil. That's fine. And explain the role of the price mechanism in allocating resources towards a competitive market equilibrium as a result of soaring demand. All right, as stated in text A, paragraph 3. So let's go back to that paragraph to understand what's happening. Here we have the article, snippets of that article from Bloomberg. And just to quickly go over, it says Saudi Arabia's energy minister said that scarcity of refining capacity. So there's a lack of capacity to ramp up production. So that's going to mean the supply curve is going to be very inelastic. It goes on to explain here physical impediments that no producer can solve. So there's physical constraints, again, the lack of capacity to increase production, and perhaps the inability to build more infrastructure to produce more in the short run. So thus, supply will be inelastic. Same time, the determines OPEC plus to stick to modest supply. Okay, fine. And then let's look at this paragraph 3. Paragraph 3 again, no refining capacity, no spare capacity. That is the determinant of the price elasticity of supply. So it's going to be very inelastic. And here it says that there's going to be a rising demand. All right. I think this article is, was, if I remember, actually, we can take a quick look. It was published in May 2022. So this is right before the beginning of the summer season. And with the summer and the end of COVID restrictions, there's an expectation there'll be a significant increase in demand for gasoline as people take to the roads on holiday, vacationing, driving to different locations, taking advantage of being able to be mobile and travel and go on holiday as they were not able to during the pandemic. So there's going to be rising demand as an expectation. And here again, it says soaring demand ahead of the peak U.S. driving season, sending refining profit margins and revenue up due to the inelasticity of demand and supply. So here we understand the rising demand, right? People exiting the pandemic, taking to the roads, going on holiday, doing perhaps an unusually higher amount of that because people were locked in during the pandemic. And so they want to take advantage of their ability to be mobile and travel and go out and enjoy their summer. So let's go ahead and illustrate this. Okay, again, all right, this question is asking us supply and demand, price mechanism, reallocation of resources, etc. Okay, great. So in the previous video, we illustrated the supply curve being very inelastic due to that lack of spare capacity. PES is going to be less than 1. Also, length of time in the short run, the inability of petroleum firms to increase their infrastructure to extract more petroleum, refine it, and export it. So perhaps these two factors, length of time and spare capacities, causing this very inelastic supply curve. So I'm going to use this. Again, if you were drawing this question, I would draw quantity, price, inelastic supply curve, and then two inelastic demand curves, and then we can analyze it. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to take rid of these notes from the previous video. And I'm going to add now my demand curve. And it's going to be very inelastic. So here I'll have my demand, just exaggerating that inelasticity here. So that's D1. And then it shifts out to D2. So here's my D2. There we go. D2 equal to the marginal benefit. Okay. This is also equal to the marginal benefit. In the short run, I'm going to hold price constant. All right, so let's use maybe a different color so we can easily see this. So price is being held constant in the short run at P1. So here we have point A. And here we have point B. And then we're going to illustrate the quantity of demand at Q3. Or actually, I'm going to label this Q2. And then we'll get rid of this for a second. Okay. Here we have Q2 is equal to the quantity of demand at a price of P1, and that is going to be greater than the quantity being supplied at Q1. So since QD is greater than QS, that means that there's a shortage of crude oil in the global market. Shortage. I can also say that there's excess demand, too much demand compared to the available supply. And whenever there's a shortage, ooh, my spelling, that's going to put upward pressure on price. So price is going to rise, as we see here, from P1 to P2 until we reach a new equilibrium here at point C. And at point C, we'll reach Q3, where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded, and we're back at a new equilibrium. Okay? All right, so I've kind of drawn the model. I'm pretty much ready to analyze this. I'm going to highlight that the price will rise and the quantity supplied and demand will change. So here we have our model. We have one upward sloping supply curve, two downward sloping demand curves. The supply is very inelastic, PES, inelastic due to the lack of spare capacity, perhaps in the short run, length of time, inability of the firms to increase their economies of scale and to increase their capacity. And we also know that there are a lack of substitutes for petroleum for firms that refine petroleum into gasoline and other products. So it's a very inelastic demand curve as well. So PED and PES, both inelastic. Higher level students are responsible to know that. And because of that inelasticity, we're going to see that the percent change in price is going to be greater than the percent change in quantity of supply and demand. Thus, if the PED, this was discussed in a previous video, if PED is less than 1, then there's a direct or positive relationship between price and total revenue. Thus meaning that if price increases, total revenue increases. And it says here in the article, if I go back, we go back to the article. All right, this is a clear sign here, sending refining profit margins and revenues to extraordinary heights due to rising price of gasoline. If price is rising and profits and revenue is increasing, that's a clear sign that it's an inelastic demand curve. Okay. So let's go ahead and analyze this as we would for an IB exam. I'm just going to take rid of this so we can have some room to make a few other notes as we analyze this model. Okay. All right. All right. As can be seen in graph, this is going to be graph C in the test. In graph C, illustrating the market for crude oil, we have being measured on the y-axis price, which is our independent variable, and on the x-axis quantity, which is the dependent variable. We have one upward sloping supply curve labeled S1 equal to the marginal costs of production. It's upward sloping as a result of the law of supply. And then we have two downward sloping demand curves labeled D1 and D2, both equal to the marginal benefit, downward sloping according to the law of demand. At point A, where the supply curve S1 equals the demand curve D1, we have an equilibrium price set at P1 and an equilibrium quantity established at Q1. At Q1, the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. In addition, at point A, we see that the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal costs of production, thus it is allocatively efficient. Firms are producing the quantity of crude oil desired by the global society. Then, as a result of rising demand, so here there's some type of change, all right, and that change is rising demand for gasoline and crude oil, rising demand for crude oil as we enter the summer, rising demand by households for gasoline to drive, and that puts demand on gasoline firms to demand more crude oil to produce that gasoline. So that causes the demand curve to shift out from D1 to D2. So in the short run, we're going to hold price constant. Right? Price is constant at P1. So at P1, the quantity supplied is equal to Q1. And at P1, the quantity demanded is equal to Q2. So here we see that quantity demanded, which is equal to the value of Q2, is greater than the quantity supplied, which is equal to the value of Q1. That's excess demand for crude oil. That creates a shortage, and that's going to put upward pressure on price. We can also see that, let's see here, we can also say that at Q1, the marginal, the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal costs of production. Okay, at Q1, the marginal benefit, if we could see this demand curve, or we take this demand curve all the way up, the marginal benefit, which would be somewhere up here, would be much greater than the marginal costs of production. So that would create that welfare loss, which I can't really illustrate. All right, and so that's an underallocation. Firms are not producing enough to meet the needs and wants of global society with regard to their demand for crude oil. So there's an underallocation, there's a shortage, and so the price mechanism takes hold. Price is going to increase, right? So the price mechanism begins. Price is going to begin to rise from P1 to P2, and as a result of the price rising, the quantity supplied will increase along the supply curve of S1. So there's a movement along the supply curve from point A to point C, or from Q1 to Q3. And there's a decrease in the quantity of demand along the demand curve from point B to point C, or from Q2 to Q3. So as price rises, quantity supplied will increase from Q1 to Q3, and the quantity demanded will decrease from Q2 to Q3. And then finally, all right, so this is kind of part one of our analysis. Part two, there's a change. Here's part of that change, part two. And then part three, the final aspect, the concluding aspect, is finally, all right, at a price of P2, where S1 equals D2, we have a quantity of Q3 where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded, and we see that marginal cost is equal to marginal benefit, thus achieving allocative efficiency in the long run. Okay. So that's it. That's how I would answer that question. Here we have the model. Here we have a breakdown of the analysis, kind of setting up the analysis is part one, x-axis, y-axis, supply curve, demand curve, initial equilibrium at point A. Then there's a change, rising demand. In the short run, price is held constant at P1. At P1, we see that the quantity supplied at point B, the quantity demanded at point B is greater than the quantity supplied at point A. We also see that at Q1, all right, at this level of production of Q1, the marginal benefit is much greater than the marginal cost. So there's an under allocation of resources to the production of crude oil versus what is desired by global society. That puts upward pressure on price. Price rises from P1 to P2, and the pricing mechanism begins. There's an increase in quantity supplied. Firms are incentivized to increase production at that higher price from point A to point C, from Q1 to Q3. And there's a disincentive on the demand side to consume. So it decreases slightly from Q2 to Q3, from point B to point C. And that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to comment on those questions below. Don't forget to subscribe and to like. In the next video, I'll continue down the exam until it's completed. The next question will look at using occlusive oligopoly, illustrated monopoly, and discuss allocative and productive efficiency and so forth within that model. So that's what we'll do in the next video. And that's it. If you have any questions, again, don't forget to comment those questions. Don't forget to subscribe and to like. Thank you so much.